All right, so hopefully you had some relaxing time over spring break, and we're getting back to our math work now. Before spring break, you learned to factor using the greatest common factor and by grouping. If you have not worked on those methods, please make sure that you visit those videos and those practice things that were given to you. Those will be zeros in the gradebook until you complete those. But this week, our work is with factoring based on a third method of difference of squares, or DOS is what we normally say as the short. So factoring for difference of squares. Remember that difference means subtraction, so you must see subtraction in the binomial, and this will only work with a binomial, so there only can be two terms, and that would know that, oh, I need to use difference of squares. And then squares refer to the numbers or variables that are perfect squares. So for example, like 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, and so on. Okay, and so those perfect squares, you can only do this method if you see those perfect square numbers. Okay, now variables, then you have to have an even exponent. So x squared, a to the 4th, k to the 10th. You cannot have an odd exponent and have this work. Okay, so just going to show you here a few, and then I'll kind of go into a little bit more of an explanation on how we break it down. But to factor here, x squared minus 9, notice it is a binomial. There are two terms. It's subtraction, and the exponent on the x is even, and then 9 is a perfect square. So I'm going to set up two parentheses. Okay, we know to get x squared we have to do x times x, so I'm going to put that in the front. X times x is x squared, and then the minus 9. When I multiply two numbers, I want to get 9. Well, the square root of 9 is 3, so that's what I used here, 3 and 3. So notice they're the same in the front of the parentheses and the back. The only difference then is that one is adding and one is subtracting. It doesn't matter which one is which, but that is the answer. If you were to distribute that back out, the middle terms would cancel out because I have the plus and the minus on the parentheses, and I would be left with x squared minus 9. Okay, moving on here, notice it's a binomial. There is subtraction again in the middle. The square root of 4 is 2, the square root of 36 is 6, so I can do this, and there's an even exponent there with the x. So I'm going to set up my two parentheses, and I mean, some students like to kind of like put the square root symbol over all of this to just kind of remind you, but like the square root of 4 is 2, so that's going to go at the beginning here. The square root of x squared is x, just like in the other one. We need x times x to make x squared. And then the square root of 36 is 6. So again, the binomials are exactly the same in the numbers and the variables that are there. It's just that one is adding and one is subtracting. And again, it doesn't matter which order that is. Okay, moving on to the third one here. It's a binomial. There's subtraction. The square root of 81 is 9, so that works. The square root of 49 is 7, so that one works. And I do have an even exponent there, so I'm going to set up my two parentheses. The square root of 81 is 9, so I'm going to put that at the front of both of those. The square root of x squared is x, and then the square root of 49 is 7. So again, both sets of parentheses are exactly the same, but now one is positive and one is negative. Again, if I were to distribute that all out, which I will show you on this one here, I get 81x squared minus 63x plus 63x, and then a positive and a negative make a negative, and 7 times 7 is 49. So these middle two are the same but opposite, so they cancel out, and I have that 81x squared minus 49, which is the original problem. Okay. All right, so moving on here. Again, just to kind of explain this then, to factor that difference of square polynomial, you're going to take the square root of both terms. And one of your sets of parentheses is going to be a plus, and the other one is going to be a minus. It doesn't matter which order they're in. Okay, so for example here with this binomial 9j squared minus 1, The square root of 9j is 3j, so you put that in the front of both parentheses. The square root of 1 is 1, so you put that in the back, and then 1 is adding and 1 is subtraction, and you're done. Okay, looking at this binomial, a to the 4th minus b squared. Remember that they have a number of 1 in front of them, so you don't really have to deal with that because the square root of 1 is 1. But notice that this first term has an exponent of 4. So if I were to take the square root of that, I would get a squared, so I put that in the front. And the square root of b squared would be b, so I put that in the back, and then 1 is adding and 1 is subtracting, and I'm done. Okay, so just doing a few more together here. Okay, if you want to pause it and try these on your own, that's great. If not, you can just kind of listen again, but there will be a practice on Canvas that I'll want you to work on. So for number 1 here, it's a binomial with subtraction. So I'm going to set up my 2 parentheses. The square root of y squared is y, so I put that in the front, and the square root of 25 is 5. I put that in the back, and then 1 is adding and 1 is subtraction, and I'm done. Okay, for number 2, it's a binomial with subtraction. So set up my 2 parentheses here. The square root of 16u squared would be 4u, so put that in the front of both parentheses, and then the square root of 9 is 3, so put that in the back, and then 1 is adding and 1 is subtraction. Okay, number 3 here, I have a binomial again with a subtraction sign in the middle, so I know I can use that DOS method, or difference of squares. So set up my 2 parentheses. The square root of 4 is 2. Now here I have to be careful. This is z to the 4th power, so the square root of that is actually z squared. Okay, and then the square root of 1 is 1, so put that in the back, and then 1 is adding, 1 is subtraction. Okay, the last binomial here, it is subtraction. I'm going to set up my 2 parentheses, take the square root here. The square root of 100 is 10, so put that in the front. Okay, the square root of h squared is h, so put that with that. Then the square root of 36g squared would be 6g, and 1 would be adding and 1 would be subtracting. Okay, again, if you always want to check your work, then distribute that back out and find that the middle terms should cancel out if you did it correctly. All right, so here on these are just some extra practice if you want to. I'm not going to do all of them. I'm going to go ahead and go through the odd problems here. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11. The others are extra if you want, but then you are required to do some practice on Canvas. Okay, so number 1, again, it's a binomial, okay, with subtraction in the middle. So I'm going to set up my 2 parentheses. The square root of a squared is a, and the square root of 16 is 4. And 1 is adding and 1 is subtracting. Okay, number 3 here, it's a binomial with subtraction again, so set up my 2 parentheses. The square root of 9b squared is 9b, so put that in front. And the square root of 25 is 5, so put that in the back. 1 is adding, 1 is subtracting. Okay, number 15. Notice that the order change doesn't matter, it's still a binomial. Okay, but now when I set up my parentheses, I want to make sure that, like, since the 16 is in front, I'm going to put that first. So the square root of 16 is 4, so I have to write that first. And then the square root of w squared is w, so w goes here. 1 is adding, 1 is subtracting, I'm done. Okay, number 7. Again, it's a binomial with subtraction, so set those parentheses up. The square root of 81x squared is 9x, so put that in front. And the square root of y squared is y, so put that in the back, and 1 is adding and 1 is subtracting. Okay, number 9, looking at this binomial, it has adding here, which means I cannot use this method. So this one is not factorable. So anytime you see that binomial with a plus sign, you cannot use DOS because this is for the difference of squares, not the addition. Okay, and number 11 here, this one is subtraction, so I'm going to set up my parentheses. The square root of b squared is b, and the square root of 144 is 12. And 1 is adding, and 1 is subtracting. Okay? So, again, if you see that adding in the middle there, you cannot. It is not the same things. If you look here at this example, if I were to do that based on difference of squares and think like, oh yeah, that works. When you multiply it back out, the middle terms, or sorry, the middle terms do cancel out, but then you get minus 25 at the end, which is not what the original problem said. Okay, so make sure that you email me with questions if you need to, but then go find the quiz that is labeled Period 2 e-learning week of April 13th to practice factoring with difference of squares. Have a great day.